Thanks everyone for joining us. Welcome to our Strengthening Families Networking webinar for April 2024. I'm very excited today about our topic of authentic fatherhood partnerships. So I'm glad so many people are also excited and interested about the topic, and we're excited to get into it. We're going to start with a little bit of a overview and welcome. If you don't usually participate in these webinars, we're happy to have you here. This is an open invitation webinar for anyone who's using the Protective Factors Framework or coordinating strengthening families efforts, whether that's in a state or within an agency or a program, or even with a national partner. We convene these jointly between my organization, the Center for the Study of Social Policy, and our partners at the Children's Trust Fund Alliance. Each month we coordinate a topic or guest speaker, and we always welcome your suggestions or volunteers who want to share something. The past recordings and materials are posted on a webinar archive that the Children's Trust Fund Alliance maintains. It's got about, 11, 12 years worth of these webinars at this point. So check that, by about Monday, that should be posted. So check that anytime you miss a webinar, or just scroll through and see topics we've covered. And we always do record these and make it available afterwards. A little more about these series of webinars. We do them on the second Thursday of the month, but we have a couple unusual months coming up. So we won't hold a webinar on May 8th because we have something very exciting happening at the end of the month in May. But we also, on June 13th, rather than a full webinar, we will be holding a Strengthening Family State Leads meeting. That will be invitation only. I'll send that invitation out soon. If you are not on the Strengthening Family State Leads list and you think you should be, look into that. You can check with me or check with the folks who are the state leads for your state, and we'll make sure to get you on there. We're not trying to exclude people. We just want to make sure that we're talking to the right people in each state. And then we will get back to our regular webinar schedule over the summer, July 11th, August 8th. Just mark that second Thursday of the month at this time and put that on your calendar. And then once you know the topic, you can decide whether you're joining or not. May 29th, we're having a special event, a virtual Strengthening Families mini summit. I'm actually going to say more about that in a minute, but for now, I just want to make sure that you know to subscribe to our newsletter. You can go to CSSP's website, really any page on cssp.org. If you scroll to the bottom, there is a Stay Informed area and a button you can click to sign up now for our Strengthening Families and other newsletters. That's where we announce all the webinars and other related news. So we're going to switch things around from our usual pattern today. We're going to start with some quick updates from myself at CSSP and from Maureen Holliker at the Children's Trust Fund Alliance. And then we will be handing off to Michael and Edward for a presentation on authentic fatherhood partnerships. So I will quickly share my updates from CSSP. I'm Kaylin O'Connor. I didn't introduce myself when we started, but that's me. I'm very excited. We are holding a virtual Strengthening Families mini summit. Some of you have been involved in Strengthening Families for long enough that you've been at in-person Strengthening Families summits. I'm here to tell you that means you've been doing this work for at least 10 years, because our last summit in person was in October 2014. And we haven't been able to do one since then, but we are doing a virtual mini summit in May. It will be from noon to 4:30 Eastern. We will be talking about the new research paper that we shared on this webinar in February, but really just talking about other aspects of it that we didn't get to in that webinar. You'll be hearing from Strengthening Families national partners and some state leads, and learning about how people do training on strengthening families and what else is kind of new or interesting in the world of strengthening families implementation. And we'll be building in a lot of opportunities to interact with other people who are participating. So we hope you'll join us. There is a registration link here. I'm told that some people are having trouble accessing it. Depends on your browser. It also might just be bad luck sometimes. So I will put links in the chat as soon as I'm done talking. We do have a $100 registration fee for that. There are group discounts available. So if your organization buys 5 registrations, you can add a 6th person for free. And we have a limited number of parent leader scholarships available because we want to make sure that parent voices are a critical part of those conversations. And as I said, we have a limited number. So if your organization can sponsor some parent leaders, please do. But parent leaders who don't have that connection or support from another organization can let us know, and we have a form available for you. So we will also record that summit, and those who register will be able to access it afterwards. All right. So that's the exciting thing coming up. And like I said, I'll put those links in the chat shortly. A lot of what we're sharing in that summit and sort of the impetus for getting everyone together is this new paper that was released in February, expanding the perspectives and research foundations of strengthening families and youth thrive, really including a lot of newer research and broadening out our scope to really think about what happens at the community, societal, policy level that influences families' strengths and challenges. So that paper is already on our website, written by my colleague, Charlene Harper Brown. And in the coming months, you'll see updated research briefs on each protective factor, other research briefs that go deeper on other topics that are in the paper, updated core functions of implementation. Mostly state leads care about that, but hopefully those are useful for other people as well. We'll have a lot of other materials coming out soon in the coming months. Finally, I just wanted to share save the date for the Together for Families conference in October. It'll be from the 22nd to the 24th. That is a virtual conference. It's international. So this year, for the first time, we've added Ireland. The Irish National Family Resource Center Forum has joined as a co-host, in addition to Families Canada and the National Family Support Network from here in the US and CSSP. We currently have the call for proposals out, so if you've got some interesting work in the field of family support that you'd like to share, please fill out the very brief form to propose a session. Those are due Those are due April 18th, a week from today. And we really hope to have lots of folks who are talking about and connecting their work to strengthening families to be part of that conference. So please consider it. All right, I'm going to hand off to Maureen to share some updates from the Children's Trust Fund Alliance.
Thank you. Thank you. I just have one quick update, and that is that our virtual training in June is open for registration. You can see it's open across the US with all of the time zones. You can scan the screen here, or we will put in the chat box the registration link and a link if you just want to know more about the training. We have over 2,000 folks across the country that are Alliance certified trainers now. And Kaylin, I think if you don't have a slide after that, then I will just share my screen now. Excellent. Well, welcome everyone. We're so happy to have you with us. And I'm really fortunate to have two of my friends and colleagues here with me today, Edward Casilla and Michael Huesca. And they're going to talk about embracing authentic fatherhood partnerships. So I will just briefly introduce them to you. First is Michael Huesca. He's a birth father from California who has been impacted by the child welfare system. For over 2 decades, he's advocated for the transformation and dismantling of our current child welfare system, most of us know as the foster care system. Michael uses his own lived experience in the child welfare system as an Indigenous, a Mexican-American, gay, single father, and as a catalyst for drive and advocacy for change. He is the chair of the board for the director of POPS, a national subject matter expert in fatherhood engagement, domestic violence, and the Indian Welfare Act, and child welfare in general. So welcome, Michael. Thank you for being with us. And also we have Edward Casilla with us. Edward lives in Tucson, Arizona. He's a proud father of 3 and 2 grandchildren. He's a strong leader and positive role model for fathers throughout the state of Arizona and participates in various boards to help prevent child abuse and neglect. He does that nationally. Edward's a member of the board for the director of POPS. He's been honored by the Casey Family Programs with the 2021 Birth Father Casey Excellent for Children Award and the 2016 Child and Family Resources Champion for the Children and Families Award by Arizona Child Abuse Prevention Committee in 2015 with the Resilient Family Award. Whew, you guys have a nice bio there. And I will also say that they are both Alliance certified trainers. We're so happy to have you with us, and we'll get started here.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for that. And Just looking at this and working with Michael over the past year and a half, maybe 2 years now, and I've known him for several years, but it really is an honor for this to finally come to fruition, because we have had together combined over 30 something years working with fathers, not only as fathers receiving services, but working directly with fathers and also managing a team of those working with fathers. And so what we have found out over the years is we always hear, how to engage fathers, right? You hear that a lot. We need to engage fathers. And what we've really noticed is that there's three parts to it. There's more like inviting fathers, there's engaging fathers, but what we're really pushing now that works is the partnership with father. And so this is how we came up with the authentic fatherhood partnerships. We're really excited to be here. Michael, would you like to say a little something?
Yeah, thanks, Edward. Edward is absolutely right. First of all, I want to acknowledge there are 97 folks on this call, which is super exciting because I was going to hold off until we got to 100, but I guess I better start now. I'd like to say hello to all of my friends. I saw a lot of folks that are logging on, and that's important to mention because this is an important topic, right? We're all wanting to know, how do we do better for our children? And this is a strategy around partnering with fathers, right? There's so much good positive evidence to support why we should do this work. But what I want to start with is to acknowledge that it's a little bit triggering sometimes when we just talk about fathers. And, we all experience trauma and triggers in different ways. So our subject does have a tendency to ignite something that may be good, something that may be uncomfortable, but something that we need to try and help elevate. And that's part of our curriculum, is really acknowledging what we're feeling and how do we really massage that, embrace that to lead us to authentic partnership. That also being said, part of the curriculum that we discovered was that we can't do one and done workshops. It just isn't sustainable. Many of you on this call know that you've been to father engagements, right? And they're called father engagements. But we want something that's sustainable. We want something that is different, and that is true partnership. And so that's a lot of what we talk about in our curriculum and around how do we authentically embrace fathers. The system's bias is what we lift. And so our goal is to help teach cognitive change. Like, this is a conscious effort every time we engage with fathers that we have to say out loud, because let's be honest, the system is not adapted or equipped to engage parents to begin with, and specifically when it comes to fathers. So that's, in a nutshell, a lot of the 30 years of experience that Edward was referring to. We've compiled, we've combined, and we are working towards. So today we're just going to jump right into it and hopefully give you a snippet of what this looks like. Edward?
Thank you, Michael. Okay, we can go ahead and put that one slide with the poem up, and we'll dive right in. So in order to embrace authentic fatherhood partnerships, it is important, like Michael was saying, to recognize that, this could be triggering. So you could have had a great relationship with your father, or maybe you didn't, but it does impact how we view fatherhood. So as I read this, I'd like everybody to kind of think about how this affects you. And as I read it, and then I think, Kaylin, you're going to go ahead and put up a poll, right?
Yep.
Right? Okay, so in
Yeah,
the world,
tell me when to put it up.
okay, all right. As soon as I'm done reading it. In the world of fatherhood, our greatest strength lies not in our muscles, but in the love we have for our children. My father was so strong that he held my dreams in the palm of his hands. So for me, and I'll share here, be transparent here, my dad was, always working out, him and my uncle, and I looked up to him so much. He was my Hulk, and I say this in several presentations, but he really was. That was my favorite superhero. But the only thing is he didn't really have a close connection with me that I so desired from a little boy. So when I became a father, I wanted to make sure that my children see me as the strength that they need is that connection. And I do my best to have that connection with them. So to hold their dreams in my hand and to help them achieve those dreams. But it's not the same for everyone. Like I said before, that it could be a positive experience or maybe not so much. So we're go ahead and put up this poll here. So what is your reaction to this poem? And you can choose the thumbs up, the thumbs down, or not sure. Michael?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I have had the privilege of having both of my parents for the last, they've been married 58 years. I'm 54, so for 54 years. And when I read this, I have mixed feelings. Like, I know I'm blessed to have the father that I have, but I know what I missed. And when I hear there's some words in here that are a little bit triggering for me, did he really hold the dreams in his hand? That's a little triggering. So I want to just be very honest and say that when I hear this and I read this, I have mixed feelings. Then when I look at it from a father, I truly hope that I gave my son the dreams, that I helped support whatever his dreams were, not my dreams, but whatever his dreams were. So I have a couple perspectives that I come at this with when I read it. But I think, I'm curious to see if we're getting some reactions from what your initial thoughts are when you look at that.
All right, so it looks like thumbs up, 83%, thumbs down 1%, not sure.
And this is really important because here's what our hope is. We all have had different experiences, right? And when we start to talk about the work of fatherhood, we have to be truthful about that and recognize that not all of us have had the same experience. And relationships are complicated. And so as we talk about, what we would like to talk about is the implicit bias that we all are prone to. And we're going to dive more into that. So back to you, Edward.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. So what we had come up with is 5 major principles to authentic fatherhood partnerships. And it really starts off with recognizing fatherhood's impact, right? Either a positive, negative, but we have to keep all 5 of these in mind when we're working with fathers. So first of all, it is recognizing that the impact, understanding the role that fathers play in children's lives. And then from there, exploring our own personal fatherhood experiences, because that is going to shape how we view fatherhood. And if we are working with fathers, if we didn't have a great relationship, are we, so closed off, are we bias so strong that we're not going to give this father a chance? And then on the other side of that, if we had a great relationship with our father, are we holding fathers to this high standard that maybe they're just not there yet, they're working towards? So it really is reflecting on our own relationship with our fathers to gain this insight into fatherhood dynamics. Oops, excuse me. Sorry about that.
And Edward, I'm going to add, and sure. David, thank you for pointing that out in the chat. Sometimes we didn't have something to measure to, right? Absolutely. And so maybe we've created or we've developed a way to cope with that, but that also could develop a bias for us doing the work when we're engaging. So really being honest about that in our space.
Go ahead, Michael. Go ahead with the addressing bias this one.
So again, addressing bias. The foundation of most of our systems have been created under a certain systemic structure, right? And so we have to be honest about the racial bias and the sexual bias when it comes to men. Our society has not adapted well to recognizing, and there's a lot of reason. I think we can all be honest about the reasons around fathers and children. My interaction and to share a little vulnerability, because I came out and I had a 6-year-old son at the time, there was this idea that openly gay male must be doing something bad to when raising a child, a male child, and so that was a systemic issue. That was an issue that some society, we had influence on. And so we have to honor and recognize that there is already a culture that exists that supports the bias. And so it really is about addressing how are we going to interact and be mindful that this bias exists. How are we going to cultivate the change? How are we going to keep ourselves aware that there's things that could pull us back, right? And appreciate that. Incarcerated father, same idea, right? Understanding authentic partnership. This is huge, because it's embracing the core principles of trust, mutual respect that are essential for both fathers and organizations. If you have this bias and, a father just got out of jail, right? There are going to be some pre-existing biases that even, for myself, I know. I had a brother who was in jail. I had a certain perspective and opinion about that I carried over to the men that I was working with, and I didn't realize that I was carrying it over, right? It took me a lot to have to, one, admit that, and two, it also took me a lot to actually have to consciously make that change, because whether I recognized it or not, it didn't allow me to get to authentic partnership. Because when that man or that individual that I had already related to in a negative way walked in, I saw other tributes to that negativity. I fed that a little bit differently. So in true transparency, a lot of this came from 20 years of messing up. A lot of this came from experience and failures and learning and relationships and building those relationships and getting the feedback. And so that brings us to the strategies of implementation. We're trying to share the knowledge that we've learned based on the experiences that we've been through, learning and applying the practical approaches and encouraging meaningful engagement, which leads to the partnership with fathers. And 30 years of understanding this and getting through this. And also, I have to say, and acknowledging that we're still learning along the way. That's what leads us to real partnership, being open, being transparent, and recognizing that we all make a little bit of trial and error as we go along with that. Edward?
Thank you so much. Okay, so we're going to go over a couple of or actually all of these now. We're going to start with recognizing fatherhood's impact. Right? Because I think we've seen some data, we've heard some of the research, but it is so important that fathers be involved in children's lives, and a healthy, nurturing father is just so important. So when fathers are absent, we're looking at children growing up in father-absent home are more likely to perform poorly in school and have lower academic achievement. We have the data to show this. Children with absent fathers are more likely to experience emotional difficulties such as depression and anxiety. And I'll be very transparent and share. I love my dad. Like I said, he was the Hulk, but we did not have that great relationship. And it did affect me going into my teenage years and puberty and all of that. I really could have used a father there to tell me kind of what I was going to go through, or at least walk beside me. And I did experience a little bit of depression and definitely anxiety. Children from father-absent homes are more likely to engage in criminal behavior and be incarcerated later in life. And then, children with absent fathers may experience challenges in developing social skills and forming healthy relationship with peers and adults. It's so important that we really look at fatherhood as not in place of mom. Right? Because moms are super important. I love my mom. I say that all the time. My mom was my strongest parenting role model. She's still there for me to this day. But it's not either or. It's really both coming together to help children reach their optimal development. So when they are present, children with involved fathers are more likely to perform better academically, right? Exhibit higher levels of educational attainment and have greater career success. Father involvement is linked to positive social development, outcomes such as empathy, cooperation, and peer acceptance. Father involvement is associated with lower rates of depression, anxiety, and stress among children. And I have a wonderful coworker, and I think he's on here, Lord. I just want to give you a shout out. And I just, I see with him his involvement with his child and the bond and attachment that they have, and how happy this little guy is around his dad. And I've seen many other fathers, but it's just so amazing to see when fathers are involved, how it really affects the child in a positive way.
Yeah, and I'll add that, as Edward was speaking about this, when I first started in fatherhood, I would get oftentimes, but what about mom? What about mom? And I like Edward, my mom is not only my biggest supporter, she was there for my son. Like, she's been the mother for both of us in a lot of ways. She's definitely represented for him the importance of having the access to at least both of his parents. And when he didn't, her role stepping in was so critical, and is critical, and is part of what makes him the man he is today. I have to say that we only are highlighting fathers because there is an explicit bias around fathers when we talk in the work that we're in. And so we often, for so long, think about it, it was only 50 years in California when we had laws that actually mandated 2-year-old children to go, or less, to go to the mother in divorces, right? And so that's not that long ago. And so we just need to really think about the systemic placements of certain things that have prevented fathers. And I'm not saying that's the answer for why fathers are not always there, but I am saying it's a contributor and we have to address it. So as we move into the next slide, and I just want to also note, yes, we are sharing this information, and we have some great notes and resources that are related to all of our information. So there's some facts checks that you're able to get to if you'd like to, and we'll share all of that with you.
I just want to recognize everybody in the chat. I'm so thankful for everything that you guys are putting in there. I think we need about 2 hours to really have this great discussion. But so thank you. Keep putting that stuff in there. So the first part was understanding fatherhood impact in a child's life. And now we want to explore our personal fatherhood experiences. So when we're doing a longer training, this gets really deep. It gets really deep. Like all of those things that we talked about in the beginning, it could be very triggering. And so we want to make sure to address that and to support that as we're experiencing that. But it is important that we do recognize our personal experiences. So what role did your father play in your family? These are some of the questions that, we're going to ask during this, longer training. And we just have some example of some father roles. Was he a remote father, little involvement with the child? Provider, the traditional father role as a breadwinner, disciplinarian. And I will say with my stepfather, I love him very much too. He was definitely a great provider. I learned a lot about his work ethic. Assistant secondary parent, helper of mother. And he was a little bit of that too. My mom did most of the parenting, even some of the discipline. And then shared caregiver, co-parenting, equitable, sharing. I think that's what children really need. That's kind of what I was hoping to do with my children. And then a primary caregiver, primary responsibility of the child. I've been a single dad for 13 years now, a little bit longer than that. And I've been the primary caregiver. And I have a whole new respect for, the single moms out there. Because the truth of the matter is, I could be a dad, but I couldn't be a mom, and my kids needed that mom. But and then the absent father role, not engaged, not involved, not around. And I was also this absent father. I had my oldest daughter who's going to be 28. For a long time, I just was not the father that she needed. I was not engaged. I wasn't involved, and I regret it. It's one of my biggest regrets in life. And I seen the impact in her childhood. We are building our relationship now, and I have my two little grandkids, so that's a beautiful thing. But you know, what kind of father did you have in your life? Or no father at all? If you didn't have your father, was there male role models? Was it a grandfather? My grandfather was a very strong role model for me, very nurturing man. Michael, your thoughts?
Yeah, and as we've seen in the chat, and I thank you all for sharing, you know, when you didn't have a father, how that impacted you. It impacted you, right? Because you showed up differently when you had your own children. You tried to show up differently when you had your own children. I mentioned I had my father, but I was very disconnected. I didn't feel like I had his support. I didn't feel like he related. You know, when I had my son, I over communicated. Oftentimes people would say, um, you know, you treat him like he's an adult, you know, he's 6, you know, but I felt like I didn't have that communication, and I wanted so desperately to be different. I wanted to be as good and better than my own father. And so even when we don't have a father, there is this piece of us that needs to be talked about and needs to be explored. And one thing I will also say as a man and as a father is it's not easy. It is not easy for me to ask for help, to share. You know, I think it's something I wish I learned earlier in life, because I see my son a lot like me. You know, he's 29 years old. He's engaged to be married, super excited. You know, he's getting married soon. But I see some traits around, you know, owning his responsibilities and not sharing them, around owning his privacy and not sharing them, all of these things. And I think, gosh, I really wish I knew what I know today, because I don't want him to have to feel the same ways that I did. I want him to know, excuse me, all of the things that are here to support. Last thing I'll say about that is, you know, in my situation, because and I saw this in the chat, I didn't feel the love that I've from my father that I think both of my brothers felt. And I often felt like I never want my child to ever think that he doesn't have the support of his father. So to this day, 29 years old, I text him, I send him messages regularly. I know it's annoying to him, but it's not because I want to check up on him. It's not because I want, you know, to know what he's doing. It's because I want him to know his dad is there whenever he needs it, because I didn't feel like I had that. And that's really important to me. Next slide. So, excuse me, as we talk about bias, again, I think we all know implicit bias is a subconscious bias that we inherit, and sometimes we don't even recognize we've inherited it, right? It's something that is nurtured within our own minds based on our the structures around us. Maybe it's family, you know, maybe it's different things that we've adopted. Maybe it's the culture within our work. Our work has culture, right? There are certain things, it might be influenced by media, it might be influenced by friends, it's a bias that we don't always recognize or own. And so that is really important, because that implicit part is subconscious. And so our belief is that a lot of what we're talking about isn't because we have social workers who don't want to work with dads. It's about the subconscious bias that exists within a bigger spectrum of just social workers, right? And so the only way I know around getting around the implicit bias that I have is, one, I have to be aware of it. And two, I have to be awake about it. I'll tell you a really quick story, and I am a storyteller, and I apologize because I will go offline. But one thing Edward and I are always saying, it's authentic.
It's authentic. That's right. Just gonna say that.
I lost a bunch of weight, and when I did so, I made a conscious effort. Okay, I need to change the way I eat, right? The challenge is at the time I was working for a reservation, an Indian reservation here. I was their tribal administrator. I would drive home late at night and I passed 3 of my favorite fast food restaurants. 90% of the time, I didn't eat my lunch. I didn't eat appropriately, right? I wasn't exercising, etc. And so as I would drive home, if I didn't stop at Jack in the Box, I had a chance to stop at the next one, which is Carl's Jr. But ultimately, it was that El Pollo Loco that I just had the hardest time to resist, right? I knew that if I wanted to lose weight, I couldn't be stopping at these places. I knew that I needed to do something different. I either needed to pack my lunch, I needed to make sure I was exercising. There was a whole bunch of things, right? But most important for me was I needed to figure out a different way home. Because in the beginning, I needed to not have those temptations because I inevitably would give in. That's what we're talking about, is seeing these bias and figuring out a strategy of making sure that we're staying true to ourselves, we're staying awake about what we're facing, and that we find another way to get to that other side and being awake about that. Edward?
I love hearing your stories, and I've already heard that one a couple times, but I love hearing your stories because it really makes sense when we're talking about bias and changing our ways and how we think. But what you've taught me is really finding out what those biases are, right? Because sometimes we don't recognize those. And I remember when my dad, he wore Brute cologne. And I mean, he was a yeller sometimes, right? I mean, he was a yeller. And so when he would yell, I would just kind of get, tense. And I remember that kind of scared feeling at time. And I remember the smell of Brute cologne. And so I just think of times where maybe I'm working with a father and I smell that and it triggers something. And it could trigger it puts me right back to being that little boy, maybe being scared, maybe just having that. And automatically I'm looking at this father and I'm thinking of my dad. And so there's a bias there, something that simple. I have to recognize that's what it is, because I may be treating him different now based on something he didn't even do. And so you taught me that. I want to thank you for that. But that's how I look at the bias. We have to figure out what they are and then be able to address them and move forward.
Yeah,
Michael,
and those biases, and I appreciate you sharing that, because I was going to say it wouldn't make sense if everybody knew I gave up wearing Brute cologne just for Edward.
True.
But it's true, and it's so important to recognize that there are those things that trigger us, and we may not be awake about it. We may not even, it may just fly over. We recognize our body starts to react, or our body starts to feel a certain way, etc. And so part of our big picture with our program is really teaching us to, one, be mindful about these things, but two, to navigate healthy through these things. What do I need to do? Especially with the work that we do, we're vulnerable for secondary trauma, right? We're vulnerable to start reliving. So we also talk a lot about making sure that we take time for ourselves and take care of ourselves. In the big picture of this work, it is so important. A lot of our peer-to-peer folks out there, we don't realize, if you start looking at the trend, there is a turnover, and it's happening, right? People are getting triggered, re-traumatized, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and we're burning out faster. So again, I think the bias is an important piece, and we are spending a lot of time here, but this is what our work is really rooted around, to share some insight on that. Next slide.
Okay, so what is authentic partnership? And Michael talked a little bit earlier about, being authentic, telling stories. I mean, that's how we really connect with people sometimes, right? A lot of the times, being our authentic selves. Now, we don't share everything maybe in the beginning, but we want to show them that we're genuine, we're authentic. So what does that look like to have a authentic partnership with working with fathers? It's a mutual respect, because we've heard that a lot, and I've also experienced that receiving services. I just don't feel respected. They don't respect me. Showing what that mutual respect looks like. Open communication is huge, huge. Shared goals, and the goal really is to strengthen the family, to help me strengthen my family, and help our children do the best. Cultural competency, understanding different cultural backgrounds, growing up in different cultures, understanding that, not judging, not having the bias about all that, right, Michael? And commitment to growth. That's another big one. Go ahead, Michael. There's a couple here for you.
Yeah, well, I just want to say that, being competent around a culture doesn't mean you understand everything, right? I think the biggest piece about all of these formulas here really is you don't have to be an expert in any of these. Again, as I said, a lot of this work has been from failures. A lot of this work has been from things that weren't as successful as we wanted them to be. And we're growing it as we go. I think the biggest piece for me always goes back to transparency. Oftentimes when we're talking about system intervention in families, oftentimes transparency is lost completely, right? And so if you're intervening in working with a family, and primarily when you're working with a father, and I will say for us as an organization, we had such a hard time working with an agency because the agency we felt, and I can say as the director at the time, I felt like the agency wanted us to be part of their team, right? And we were supposed to find information and share information, and all of this stuff went back to the agency. Well, our fathers were like, well, whose side are you on, right? Are you here to support me? Because there were sides. We don't want to say that, but there were sides. As far as the father was concerned, the family was concerned, there were sides. And so we developed a formula to where we felt, regarding transparency, and this is just one example, when we had to write reports, the father wrote the report. He'd sit down with whoever his case manager was. We would sit down, figure out what needed to be said. If there was a court report that needed to be turned, it came from the hand of the father. We would interact and we would talk and we would walk it through. And so that way, nothing ever left our relationship. It was together that we built this, we submitted it, and it was everything was on the table, even when it was something that we have to report back that was a negative thing. The father knew exactly what was going to be said. So that's a huge piece. Co-design, David, you're absolutely right. It's a huge piece around this work. Next slide, sorry. So as we talk about strategies for implementation, these are the keys. And again, this is I look at this as a tree that continues to have more branches. It's just continuously growing, but valuing and respecting fathers. And before I go further, I'll just say, many times when we share this information with organizations, they say, oh, we already do this. Oh, we already do this, right? Yet the engagement or participations from fathers, it does not reflect that. So truly reading this and then actually putting it into action is what we talk about. We really talk about learning from the constituents within the space that we're in. So if we're invited to a jurisdiction, we hear from the fathers. We may hold a series of roundtables of cafes, gather some information, and then we can come back and say, okay, when you say you value, this, what does that mean, right? And here's what the constituents say as far as this goes. When you say you respect fathers, what does that mean? Because this is what we're hearing, right? So value, respect, acknowledge and engage, link and support. All of these things I think when you hear them, we already know that we should be doing this, right? But we have strategies to really dive into making sure they're tailored when we're engaging fathers. Engaging fathers with a higher ethical standard, transparency, cultural competency based approach is really important. Again, like I said earlier, I think that for what we've learned, and oftentimes this is kind of unconventional in our work, I think, in the world of community involvement and nonprofits, etc., is I find that most parents, and I'll speak towards fathers specifically, when you offer concrete supports first and foremost, it's like a huge, like, oh my God, they really are trying to help me. I know that's not always possible, but it certainly is a big piece to help build the relationship, to help connect those positivities. Um, and I would say that that's really a big part of that. Edward? Oh, excuse me.
I was looking at the share and encourage, share information about the 5 protective factors for fathers that will strengthen their parenting. I've been working now with the protective factors for a while, and it's really implemented into my language and the services and the programming working with fathers. And I don't even realize it most of the time, but it is so true how important the 5 protective factors are when working with fathers. So we want to share those kind of things because it will promote optimal child development and it will reduce the likelihood of child abuse and neglect. We want to encourage fathers. We want to encourage fathers to build those 5 protective factors in their lives, provide mutual support to other fathers, and promote authentic fatherhood partnership in the communities. So these are just some like touch points on the actual strategies for implementation. Because we had a short amount of time, we dive in a lot deeper to these implementations, because this is where we actually get to work with the fathers. We've already understood the impact of fathers. We've recognized the relationship we had with our fathers, the bias. Now we know what understanding authentic partnership really is. And so this implementation piece is really crucial in supporting those fathers and letting them know that you're partnering with them to strengthen their family. And so this is something that we would provide ongoing support, because we're not, like I said, the one and done. We don't want to do that no more. It's okay for maybe just an idea and to spark an idea, but we need technical, support. We need to have that. We need to role model what authentic partnership looks like, and that is something that me and Michael are available to do.
And to support that too, Edward, going back to my analogy about, I didn't always have to take that longer route home that avoided those 3 different fast foods. And true to form, I did find out where the other fast foods were on my new route. But my point is that at some point I was able to go back to that way, but I had to be aware that there are going to be those habits that pop up. And when we're talking about fatherhood and engaging fathers, it's really around developing a relationship. It's really around being aware that we could slip back into our old practices. It's easy to do, especially if you're in a culture who doesn't embrace the father the same way. I'll quickly tell you, I was thinking of a story. I had been working with a team of social workers, and they were working with a father that was a little bit of a challenge, had multiple children in this. And social worker called me. She was crying, and she said, I'm just so mad. Do you ever get to that place where you're crying, you're so mad? Right? And I was like, well, how can I help support you? And she said, well, here's what happened. We went into this TDM, and everybody had this conversation. This is where we were going to go. We were going to make these recommendations. Nothing new was disclosed. Nothing new came up, but there was one person in there who just kept gaining momentum as she talked, and people were starting to align. And pretty soon I felt the culture shift. And she said, and I felt so bad because at the end, I just threw up my hands and said, all right, fine. And she said, I subdued to the rest of what everybody else was going for. And I felt so bad afterwards because I didn't see it coming from myself. She said, I thought I was just going to go fight all the way, but I started to adapt to the culture. The big aha moment for her was she was mad at herself. She was mad at that she fell to this, and she recognized, and she was able to do some repair, because imagine how that felt for the father who was in there. But I can relate where there's been times where I've been absorbed by the rest of the group, by the culture, by all of these different things that are there. And so a lot of our strategies are around really developing this in a way to where you can actually meet your fathers where they are, and you can actually have an authentic fatherhood partnership. That's really so critical. We offer presentations, workshops, and implementation contracts because Edward said it, we've been saying it, one and done doesn't work. We want to help develop and equip you with sustainable projects, sustainable programs that work. And that's not done just once, right? That's actually something you have to cultivate, you have to nurture, you have to grow. And that's what we're really about. Even in our workshops, doing series that advance, you might get an orientation. And then, a lot of what we're going to give you is we're going to survey. We're going to first find out, what exactly is the problem, because it's not always the same problem, in the sense of, I may not be doing this in this jurisdiction, but they're doing it in this jurisdiction. That being said, there are lots of fatherhood problems across the country. We know that. So I think we're at that end part. I did notice there was a question in the chat, or in the question and answer box. And I think we're going to be able to give some time here, Caitlin, to ask questions and have some answers. But I want to suggest, the question was, what advice or resources would you have to provide two moms raising a child? Well, okay, so my partner and I have been together for 23 years. And my son is 29 years old. My partner and I operated, and my son has had probably no contact with his mom since he was about 7. And I was fortunate because I had found, my mom was very involved, but I also had friends that were mothers of their own that interacted with my son, not to fill the void of his mom, because that I knew he knows who his mom is. He knew who, and that wasn't the goal. The goal was just to offer the female perspective, the mother perspective, to have that support, even though it was different than some of his friends, right? And so for me, in my situation, it was finding the resources around me, the people around me, the social groups around me. When I didn't have that, trying to find interactions that were positive female involvement. I remember signing him up, which he wanted to do, in a cooking class that one of the moms was putting on for his school. Just trying really consciously to be able to support him in those spaces. And I think the same could be done for a dad. I think our biggest challenge is when we try to go and replace. And we may not be doing that, but we've got to be careful with our language. We've got to continue to support positive male interaction when we know that there isn't a dad there per se. Edward, any thoughts around that?
No, I think you summed it up really nice. I think you hit all the points there.
There were a couple questions in the chat that I want to bring your attention to. One is from Kyle saying, given the way the concept of family is changing. Any thoughts on moving away from the labels of father or mother and using the word parent, particularly in policy and law?
Yeah. Well, I'll start with this. I have worked with several thousands of men directly, primarily around fatherhood. Some of them were biological fathers, some of them were adopted fathers, some of them were stepfathers. And I have had my own experience as a stepfather, because something I don't talk often about is my biological son has two older siblings that I adopted and I raised. I've always go back to the science for me, as well as the information when it comes to biological parents. The men that I've worked with who did not have access to either mom or dad, the biological parents, always shared this desire to be connected to those biological parents. Always, and it may have taken them time to get to that space. So where I go back to is recognizing that there is that biological piece, whether it's vocalized, whether it's talked about, whether they're there, that I think is always a challenge for people to get through. So I just have to say that I'm mixed when it comes to the information around changing certain terminology, because I know there is a biological connection that we feel. And even when we don't have access to those parents, we still feel the impact of their absence, right? A lot of the men that I've worked with had great parent role models that have supported them, that have stepped into spaces. But when vulnerable and when willing to share, they would say, but I still wish I knew my dad, my mom, etc.
Thanks, Michael. There was another comment or question saying that, that they had heard that in addition to the stats that you delivered on the first slide about the importance of fathers, that it had been tied to child health, to physical health. I think that's probably accurate. We don't have the stat right off the bat, I don't think here, but I'll give you an opportunity, Michael and Edward, to comment on that.
Sure. You can find a lot of that, I think, on fatherhood.org. I think that's where it's at. But it is true when fathers play with their children, it does help their physical development. It helps them take chances. It does build that the heart rate, all of those things. And mom could do that too, but fathers bring that unique perspective to it. Because most of the time fathers will be a little daring and, the throwing up in the air kind of thing, those kind of things you don't see a lot of moms doing. And that's okay too, but it does. It definitely helps the physical strength and growing up, the physical development.
Yeah, and I would say there's two resources that I would turn to. One, the Bible, the Boy Crisis. If you don't have it, I suggest you can get it. Has a lot of great resources. Dr. Farrell talks a lot about the brain science behind that. And then two, the CDC around ACEs. There's a lot of incredible information they're finding and they're linking to fathers in particularly. So we're getting more and more evidence to support the involvement of fathers, but I would suggest those two have some good resources to lean into.
Well, the timing today was impeccable because we are right at 4 p.m. So as we close out, what is the best way for folks to reach you if they want to talk to you about having a presentation or a workshop or a
Yes.
contract for implementation?
So right here on Michael at San Diego Pops, I'm sorry, Michael at popsorganization.org. And we are getting so close to unveiling our brand new website. And so hopefully I'll get a list of folks and I will send that over to all of you once that's available. it was supposed to be ready months ago, but you know how technology goes. It's still almost there. So as soon as it's available, we will certainly be happy to share that information. In the meantime, Michael at popsorganization.org is a great way to connect.
Excellent. I've put in a flyer for the Alliance training. Someone was asking for that, so I put that in there. And again, if you go to the site that Kaylin gave you with past webinars, you will find all of the information from today's webinar. It will likely be up by Monday.
Great.
And I just want to say thank you, Edward and Michael. This was so great. And the engagement in the chat was amazing. Great to see so many men and women and people from all over the country who are just sharing what they're doing and their perspectives, both in their own families and the work they do, engaging fathers. So I think we should talk about this more. And I hope that I know that people got a lot out of this. I'm really grateful to both of you for bringing it. And thanks to Maureen for coordinating this. And I think we're done for this month. Thank you all.
Thank you all so much. Thank you.
Thank you all. Great to see you all. Maureen, are we capturing the chat as well?
Yep.